Hello everyone, I'm Roberta Pigliapochi, a postdoc with the group of Professor Carlos Moriles at CUNY in New York. I'm going to present an ongoing work that we've been doing with Daniela and Arthur, also from the Moriles group, and in collaboration with Pablo from the University of Cordoba in Argentina. Our study focuses on probing transitions between hybrid multispin states of NV and P1 centers and the interacting carbon-13 nuclei in diamonds. And we are interested in obtaining coherent control of these hybrid systems combining nuclear and electronic spins. As we're going to work with NV and P1 centers in diamonds, I will introduce them quickly. A nitrogen vacancy, or NV, is a defect in diamond that consists of a nitrogen and a vacancy, and it is essentially a paramagnetic spin 1 defect that very conveniently for us polarizes into the MS equals 0 state optically. Another kind of defect, which is even more abundant in our host, are neutral substitutional nitrogens, or P1 centers, and these are paramagnetic spin 1/2 defects. So at sufficiently high concentrations, such as the case in our sample, random distributions of these defects interact with each other to form variable size clusters of electronic and nuclear spins that are found in different coordination environments. And these many spin systems are hybrid states, basically. They're nearly degenerate, and their dynamics is central to the spin diffusion mechanism. So provided that we tune appropriately the magnetic field, we can create the condition for cross-relaxation between the NV and the P1, as we will see in a couple of slides, and that ultimately allows for polarization transfer to the nuclear spins, such as the carbon-13, in the surrounding of the defect, as well as in the bulk of the diamond. And it is the enhanced polarization of the carbon-13 nuclei that we are going to detect using NMR. And more in particular, we will combine field cycling experiments with selective RF excitation to probe the transitions between these hybrid multispin states, and we are going to use the bulk carbon-13 spins as a long-term polarization reservoir. I'm going now to spend a couple of words on the setup, and more details can be found in this paper by Daniela from 2018. So our sample is a 100 diamond. It's a single crystal. It has a nitrogen content of about 70 ppm and 10 ppm of NV centers. The diamond is integrated in a custom-made NMR probe head, which is in contact. The diamond is in contact on one side with the RF, with the coil that we use for RF delivery, and on the other side with another coil that we use for NMR detection. So the basics of our experiment are as follow. The first step, which I'm calling pumping here, consists of the probe head sitting right below the spectrometer. There, the diamond experiences a low stray field of about 52 millitesla, and we are able to slightly tune that field by using this pair of electromagnets. The diamond is also reached by a green laser beam, and that is also where we deliver the radio frequency excitation. And it is important for us to keep the sample down there, because the dynamics at play that we are interested in occur at this low magnetic field. But for us to be able to detect the processes induced at this low field, we will then shuttle our probe head inside the NMR magnet up to a point where inside the NMR spectrometer, the sample is at high field now, and 9.4 Tesla, and this is where the NMR detection, or the acquiring step, takes place. We are going to detect using the sequence that I'm showing here. Now onto the results. We can start with the simpler protocol that allows us to elucidate the polarization transfer to carbon-13. So the first pulse sequence is really very simple. This is the optical pumping step, so a low magnetic field. It just consists of 10 seconds of laser excitation, followed by the shuttling and the acquisition of high magnetic field. And the sequence is repeated several times as a function of the magnetic field. Now, although simplified, the model on the left, which was presented in the same paper that I mentioned earlier, is convenient for us to illustrate the process. So if we have an NV center and a P1 center at relatively short distance, so that they can interact through the dipolar coupling, we can define an effective Hamiltonian that is given by the zero field splitting of the NV, the two Zeeman terms, and the dipolar term between the two spins. And if we look at the Zeeman energy as a function of magnetic field, we see that there are specific magnetic fields at which the energy difference between the levels of the P1 and those of the NV are nearly equal. And these matching conditions enable cross-relaxation between the two spins. Now, if we add a nuclear spin interacting with the defects, for example via hyperfine coupling, the cross-relaxation splits into the possible transitions in this three-body process. And this is what we are experimentally detecting through the carbon-13 NMR signal, which is the plot that I'm showing on the right, in the dispersive light profile. Each of these dispersive transitions corresponding to one of the three matching conditions. To then probe the dynamics of the spin clusters that I mentioned earlier, we implement a protocol that consists again of a laser excitation of 10 seconds and simultaneously a radio frequency excitation during the same time window. So what is going to happen here is that the green illumination again spin pumps the NVs into the ms equals 0 state, while the radio frequency driving at variable frequencies allows us to probe transition between these hybrid nearly degenerate states in the multi-spin clusters, and that is what governs the nuclear hyperpolarization process. So as we see here, the impact of the RF on the observed signal can be substantial. For example, if we compare the radio frequency off pattern to the other two cases, we see that the signal almost vanishes under 11 megahertz excitation, while at 22 megahertz the RF leads to very strong modulation of the field dependence. To better understand the dynamics at play, we focus on the central region of the pattern that I showed earlier and conduct a systematic measurement of the induced NMR signal as a function of the applied radio frequency at different magnetic fields. So you can see that as we increase the applied radio frequency, we observe the emergence of regions of inverted carbon-13 signal that gradually displace to the outer sections of the field range that we probed. We also find that the signal inversion is depends exponentially on the RF amplitude, and it saturates as we reach a plateau. I want to emphasize that all the frequencies in this range are very far removed from the bulk carbon-13 Zeeman resonance, which at 52 millitesla is about 560 kilohertz. And it is also, this frequency range is also far from any electronic spin resonance. So really what this hints to is the fact that we are driving hybrid transitions within the electronic and nuclear multi-spin clusters. The trend that we see in our experiments is also supported by the numerical simulations done by Pablo. This work is still ongoing, and in the interest of time, I'm not going to go too much into the details. The bulk of the theoretical background can be found in this recent paper by Pablo, but in a couple of words, the approach is based on, again, a three-body effective Hamiltonian for the NV, P1, and carbon-13 system. The Hamiltonian consists of a time-independent part for the Zeeman and the hyperfine terms, and a time-dependent component that models the effect of the radio frequency driving. As a final slide, I am going to show some preliminary and ongoing results. So we first turn the attention to the Rabi oscillation at the nuclear carbon-13 Larmor frequency. This represents the response of the bulk carbon-13 nuclei, and the trend is shown on the left. So we find a Rabi frequency of the order of 100 microseconds. We change the pulse sequence slightly to incorporate short laser pulses of about 50 microseconds and a dark time of about 100 microseconds, during which we then send a radio frequency of much higher value far away from the regime of the nuclear alarm or frequency. And what we find is the trend shown on the right. These, as a response to a radio frequency in a very different regime, what this corresponds to is the response of the cluster, a hybrid cluster containing electrons and nuclei. And what we see from the trend is an oscillatory behavior, which indicates coherent mechanism, but since it is driven very far off resonance, this indicates that the modulations are driven by hyperfine couplings and nuclear electronic interactions. The Rabi-like profile shows much faster oscillations, indicating the modulation of, indicating the electronic behavior of the hybrid nuclear and electronic system. And we also see that the trend does not seem to be defined by only one characteristic frequency, and this hints at the interplay of a variety of coordinations for the NV, P1, and carbon-13 clusters. So our study is still ongoing, but it's pointing at the fact that for the first time you're able to manipulate the dynamics of multi-spin clusters and create Rabi oscillations between the nearly degenerate levels of these hybrid systems. With these, I would like to thank the people involved in this work, Carlos, Arthur, Daniela, and Pablo. And if you have any questions, please reach out to me anytime, and thank you all for the attention.